Hello, this is Trevor. Welcome back to the channel. Now, it is not a secret that more and more people are starting to ask the question, is the UK still worth it? Should I leave? Should I stay? People are starting to weigh their options. And honestly, I don't blame them. I get it because the cost of living is through the roof. Just look at the rentals, the mortgage payments. Just the other day, I made a video talking about the water bill, how it is set to rise in April. The bills keep going up. And also, I've just learned that the visa fees are set to rise again. And don't get me started on the immigration rules, how everything is becoming tighter nowadays. And if you happen to lose your job for whatever reason, if you're on sponsorship or that kind of visa that is tied to your job, you have this looming sense of fear that any day, any moment, you could be sent back home. And speaking of jobs, nowadays, getting a job is no longer as easy as it used to be. These days, sometimes you have to go through rounds of interviews, like 3, 4, 5, 6 rounds of interviews. Gone are the days when you just go for an interview, just one interview where you're grilled, and at the end of that interview, they decide whether to offer you the job or not. And even if you get the job, the vetting process is taking longer nowadays. Like, it is becoming stricter. They're scrutinizing everything. I mean, people have always been vetted, but these days, the vetting process is now on a whole new level. So with everything happening, no wonder people are starting to ask, is the UK still worth it? Because being constantly on survival mode, because that is what it is feeling like, which quite frankly can be exhausting, people are starting to wonder, what if I can make things work back home? If you're like me, you come from Africa, you come from Zimbabwe, maybe you're from Nigeria, Kenya, maybe you're from another country, India, wherever you're from, you might be wondering, am I not better off going back home? What if I can make things work there? At least I'll be in the sun instead of staying here, fighting to survive, justifying my existence, struggling every day. So nowadays, there's that strong emotional pull of home where the home that people ran away from is starting to look more attractive. Now, if you've been watching my channel, then you already know that I'm big on fixing Africa. I'm a big believer in fixing our countries so that we no longer have to run to have a better quality of life. I'm big on that. But here's the thing. Right now, going back home might not be the great solution that we think it is. I'm not saying this to discourage anyone. I'm just here to give you the full picture so that when you're reflecting and making those big decisions, you have something to help you come to that decision. Because as much as we dream of home, we need to be honest about what that actually looks like, especially after years living abroad. So when is leaving the UK a huge mistake? The first reason is you haven't planned. Now, there are two scenarios. The first scenario is talking about someone who wants to go back home. Let's say someone like myself who came from Zimbabwe, and now I'm looking at the situation in the UK and I'm thinking, you know what, I might as well relocate back to Zimbabwe. Then in such a situation, you really need to plan. Now, when it comes to planning, there are a few key things to consider. For me, I always say that if I'm to go back home, there are two main things that I need. I need a roof over my head and I need a source of income. As far as I'm concerned, those are like the two key things that I need if I'm to leave the UK to go back home. I always say that the rest can work itself out. Of course, there will be some adjusting to be made. And if you're going to adjust, then you have to think about your lifestyle. How comfortable are you making those adjustments? Because things are going to be different. That one is a given, because back home, there's going to be things like power cuts. If you don't like, or if you're not comfortable with that situation, what are you planning to do with that when that happens? Because it is surely going to happen. So look at your lifestyle, your expectations, and what you're comfortable with, and be honest and realistic about that. So yeah, if you haven't planned for the move, then going back home, you can't just up and leave and go and say, you know what, I'll start planning when I get there. That would be a huge, huge mistake, because those people you see who have relocated successfully have planned, and the planning didn't just take a few months, it took years. It takes a while to execute that plan. The second scenario is someone planning to leave the UK, not to go back to their homeland, but to go to another country. Maybe they are planning to go to Dubai, to Thailand, to Australia, to start a brand new life there. What plans have you made? Where is your source of income? What arrangements have you put in place? What is the lifestyle in Dubai? What is the lifestyle in Thailand? Is that lifestyle going to make you happy? Have you done your research on that country? Because you might go there only to find that actually it is worse than the UK. Yes, in the UK, I was running away from bills, but in Thailand, there is this side of that country that I'm not comfortable with. In Dubai, there's a side that I'm not comfortable with. In America, there's this side of America that I don't really like. So research is important. It is also part of planning. Know where you're going, because there is a documentary that I watched. I can't remember if it's a documentary or it was just someone telling the story. Anyway, it's basically a story of this YouTuber who relocated to a country that was dangerous. And he was living a certain kind of lifestyle that was actually triggering the locals there. And eventually he was unalived. The locals were not happy with the way he was conducting himself, with some of the things that he was doing. So yeah, that is what I gathered from that. So you need to know where you're going, the culture there, if you'll be comfortable with that culture. So yeah, planning is important. The second reason why leaving the UK would be a huge mistake is that you haven't considered healthcare. Now, this one is a major one. Now, when I talk about healthcare, I look at two things. The first thing is the general worry that we all have. Like when you go back home or when you go to a place, you need to know if you're going to have easy access to healthcare, if you're going to afford healthcare, and so on. Those are the kind of things you need to think about. So that is like the general worry that we all have. The second scenario is the more serious scenario where someone has got a long-term condition. This one is a major one. It's a big deal, because if you've got a long-term condition that needs to be managed on a regular basis, if you need a refill of medication, then before you up and leave the UK, where we've got our good old NHS, where you've got access to healthcare, you want to really stop and think. Will you be able to access healthcare? Will you be able to access dialysis machine? Will you be able to access insulin if you're diabetic? Will you be able to access your BP tablets? Will you be able to access your heart medication? If you're going to be able to access that dialysis machine, that BP medication, those insulin shots, are you going to be required to pay for them? If you need to pay for your medication, are you going to be able to afford? How realistic is it going to be in your situation? Because managing some of these chronic illnesses can be tricky, and depending on where you're going, access to proper treatment may not be as straightforward as you think. And even if you don't have anything to worry about, meaning that you don't have any chronic conditions to think about, one thing you need to remember is that as you get older, things start popping up. I mean, that's just how life goes. The older you get, the more chances of getting some of these illnesses. So if you haven't considered healthcare, then leaving the UK, leaving our good old NHS could be a huge mistake. The third and last reason why leaving the UK could be a huge mistake is that you are romanticizing the idea of leaving the UK to go back home or to go and live in another country. I'll start with the scenario of going back home. For example, if I'm romanticizing the idea of going back to Zimbabwe, if that is the reason I want to go back home, then that would turn out to be a huge mistake. Let me explain. What I've realized, having lived in the UK for 25 years, there are times when I romanticize or I have this fairy tale idea of going back home or what going back home would feel like, because maybe I've been in the UK for so long and now I'm longing for the good old days. Someone like me who grew up in that era where food was in abundance in Zimbabwe. I remember the time when we used to throw away food in the bin. I mean, there was food everywhere. And I also grew up in an era where I was guaranteed of a job after finishing school. I knew there was a job waiting for me somewhere. That was like a done deal. It didn't matter what type of job, but you knew you had a job to go to. So I grew up in that era. I mean, I'm always telling my daughter how wonderful life was in Zimbabwe when I was growing up, how I used to play, how we used to relate with one another, how peaceful everything used to be. So that's the Zimbabwe that I remember, and it is the Zimbabwe that I often fantasize about. And because I only go to Zimbabwe for 3-4 weeks, sometimes a little bit longer, I don't get to have the full experience of what exactly it is like, the situation on the ground. I know things have changed, I know that, but because I don't stay long enough, I don't get to experience, because whenever I come back, I'm always complaining. I wish I could stay a little bit longer because I'm still enjoying myself. In other words, my memories and the reality on the ground are not in full alignment, because the truth is, moving back means losing some of the conveniences that you've gotten used to abroad in the UK, because we're talking about the UK. If you're not prepared to adjust, life could become frustrating. You could experience a lot of stress, anxiety, even depression, because you may find out that simple things like online shopping, reliable internet, those kind of things that we often take for granted here, you will find that those things suddenly become luxuries. I mean, let's call a thing a thing. This could become really frustrating. It could change your life, in ways you've never imagined, especially if you've lived abroad for a long time. And also there's the issue of reverse culture shock, because the Zimbabwe that I'm used to is not the Zimbabwe that is there now. I will need to adjust. Some things I'll need to get used to them again. Some things I'll be learning about them for the first time. So yeah, for someone like me who is now used to these kind of things, I need to be honest with myself when I'm thinking about leaving the UK to move back home. The same applies to someone who's planning to leave the UK to go to another country to start a brand new life there, because they think if they go there, they will have a better quality of life. Then you also need to be honest and realistic about the situation in that country. Is there going to be internet in that country? If internet is important to you, is it going to be reliable? If it is not going to be reliable, what are you planning to do about it? Also, thinking about delivery services. If you need to be able to order something online and get it delivered as soon as you want it, are you going to be able to get that sort of service? And if not, how important is that for you? Is this something that you can compromise on? Are you going to be comfortable? What sort of life are you going to be comfortable with? Because sometimes as well, when we watch videos online of people telling us about their lives in another country, for example, I watched a video about someone who lives in Thailand, because I understand, from what I'm gathering, Thailand is affordable. I gather that 200 pounds in Thailand is a lot of money. So if you're watching those type of videos, you will then start to have these romanticized versions of what your life could be like if you were to leave the UK and go there. The same applies to Dubai, Australia, America. Maybe someone is telling you, you know what, come here life is like this. Or maybe you're watching videos or you're reading about it and you're thinking, wow, I want to leave the UK. My life is going to be great there. It's going to be much better there. I call this romanticizing a place, because unless you do your research, like a thorough research of a place before you leave the UK, you can't be 100% that your life is going to be much better there. So this is why, if you romanticize a place when you don't have the full facts, or when you don't have the full picture of what that place is going to be like, to feel like, then leaving the UK could be a huge mistake. So yeah, this is what I had for you in this video. Can you think of other reasons, situations where leaving the UK could turn out to be a huge mistake? What are some of the things that we ought to be thinking about? As always, feel free to chip in the comment section. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.